Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, September the 11th, 2023. So I think you know what I'm going to be talking about today. I'm going to be talking about the 9/11 attacks on September the 11th, 2001. I do understand that a lot of astrologers have talked about 9/11, and I'm sure that very little I say today is going to be particularly original. You know, all the charts have been done to death. Sorry about that phrase. So I'm going to be looking at the 9/11 chart. I'm going to be looking at the United States chart and how the 9/11 chart, you know, when that first plane hit the World Trade Center, you know, what was the impact on the United States in an astrological sense. I'll be looking at George Bush Jr.'s chart. You know, he was the president at the time. And what else? I'll be looking at bin Laden's chart. So those of us, those are the charts I'm going to be looking at. I just hope that somewhere in there I'm going to say something that hasn't been said before, but it's going to be quite difficult being original. But anyway, before I talk about 9/11 in 2001, I want to talk about 9/11 in 2023, and I want to look at today's astrology. So let's go. Let's look at what's happening today. So today is Monday. And here's the chart for today, set for New York at noon. The moon is now well established in Leo, and it's making a conjunction to Venus. And, yeah, that's good news. Moon-Venus conjunction is great. Two feminine planets, two planets connected with emotion and relating in a conjunction aspect. It's very harmonious. Relationships should work well, provided we have some respect for the other person's ego. Because this conjunction is in Leo, so there could be a sense in which we need a recognition, and if we don't give recognition to the people who need recognition, there could be trouble. Also, the moon is making a sextile aspect to Mars. So moon making fortunate aspects to both Venus and Mars is good for relationships. Venus is the male planet. Venus is a female planet of female sexuality. Mars, male planet of male sexuality. They're brought together by the moon. So relationships of all kinds should work pretty well today. The moon and Venus are in Leo. So Leo is not a particularly emotional sign, and the moon doesn't actually work too well in this sign. So it's not really about emotional dissolving, that kind of thing. It is, as I've already suggested, quite ego orientated. It's about people feeling good about themselves, and also people being very clear about their identities. So we need to respect other people's identities. We can get on with them, we can relate to them, but they're still separate individuals with separate egos, and they're going to be proud. And proud people need to be complimented. So bear that in mind. If you want to get on with people, don't be afraid of lavishing them with praise. Okay, you don't have to go over the top, but a carefully worded compliment could really do the trick in terms of getting someone to like and respect you. So, that is the main stuff going on today. Okay, later on, the moon does make a square aspect with Jupiter. That could be a bit indulgent towards the end of the day. Just laying it on a bit too thickly. Some danger of spending too much money. If the moon is connected with Venus and Jupiter, there could be a sense of exaggeration. And yeah, so make sure that you know when to stop. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say really about the planets for today. It's good. I wouldn't have said it was outstanding, but I think in terms of dealing with other people, getting on with other people, I think most of us can make really good progress. So I now want to move on to the 12 signs. So as always, here are my forecasts for the 12 signs for Monday, September the 11th, 2023. Aries. You're making a big effort to make a big impression, and your expansive style could win you new friends. But it's important that you know when to stop. At the same time, you know how to enjoy yourself, and if you're in the company of other people, your fundamental attractiveness will be obvious. Taurus. It's important to play on your strengths. You're a rock of stability, particularly now when Venus is moving through a foundational sector of your solar chart. People trust you and they're ready to follow your lead. At the same time, you can strengthen existing relationships with displays of reassuring reliability. Gemini. There's no need to be in a hurry. Everything will happen at the appointed time, and right now, hasty behaviour could cause delays. Also, you don't want to cause confusion by talking about too many different things at once. Stick to the point, though don't be afraid of using some gentle flattery. Indeed, a few choice compliments could open many doors. Cancer. There's a conjunction between the moon and Venus in Leo. You do have quite a high opinion of yourself, and you may well get the praise you deserve. And the way you look, your appearance, could be very important. On a different note, you're currently attracting money, so see if you can put yourself in the right place at the right time. Leo. Your overall sense of self is intensifying, and your sense of drama and occasion will push you into the limelight. But you're going to occur to different people in different ways, and you can't expect to be friends with everyone. So if possible, you should exercise some sensitivity. But your attractiveness will be obvious. Virgo. Discretion is important, particularly now. You have to make sure that if you're told something, you really keep it to yourself within the limits of the law. That way, you'll be cultivating people's trust, and you'll also be doing the right thing, because at the moment, Virgoans who gossip are unlikely to win any friends. Indeed, they could lose credibility very quickly. And I should also say that someone close has a high opinion of themselves. Libra. You're in a good position, particularly for a Libran, because you can see where you are in the various social networks around you. And you can also see that you have considerable popularity, but don't just accept the situation as it is. It's important to be assertive, because you'll be protected by your sensitivity and grace. Scorpio, you're looking good, thanks to a conjunction between the Moon and Venus. You project a charismatic and attractive image, and it's a great day for interviews and for bringing new people into your life. And there probably isn't a rigid boundary between your career and your social life. Workmates can be friends and more. Sagittarius. It's a Sagittarian kind of day in the sense that you can be yourself and move around to the places you want to be. In the process, you'll cover new ground and hopefully you'll be inspired by novel ideas that challenge the status quo. Things that feel tedious and unoriginal should probably be avoided. Capricorn, your emotions are powerful. At least today they are. And you can get through the chinks in people's armour. A gesture, a word out of place, is all it takes to reveal the underlying truth about someone's personality. And if you trust your feelings, you can respond in the right way. And if you meet nice people, make sure that you make a special effort to put them at their ease. Aquarius, it's now becoming quite important for you to consider all points of view and not get fixated on your own individual perspective. The truth is not in one place, and friendly discussion is the way forward. And if another person refuses to give ground, then consider their reasons. Their approach might actually be sensible rather than just stubborn. Pisces. There's no need to take on everything at once. Instead, break things up into steps. That way you won't be overwhelmed and you can slowly move towards the achievement of your aims. Okay, you're unlikely to get any short-term recognition, but really that shouldn't bother you. It's enough to know that you're on the right track. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to move to the I Ching. And as always, I threw 3 coins in the air. And I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for visitors to my YouTube channel? So the first hexagram I got was hexagram 28, preponderance of the great. So if you look at this hexagram, you can kind of see a big block in those central 4 unbroken lines. So that's like a big load. And at the top and the bottom are the handles. And like the handles, they're just not good enough to lift what we need to lift. So there's a chance that today we may be dealing with something that is just too much. So it may literally be that you're having to move something very heavy, in which case I would suggest you don't, because you don't want to do yourself an injury. But it just might be a task that you have set yourself, which is just something that you really can't do. So, be careful and remember that sort of valor is a better part of discretion. Now, there is a moving line, this one here, and this moving line is problematic because it suggests that even though we're aware that we're dealing with some kind of heavy load, some really difficult task, we might just plough ahead regardless. Indeed, there is a high likelihood that's what we do. We just keep pushing ahead. It's almost because we're programmed to keep pushing ahead. Doesn't matter how heavy the load is. We keep going. And in the process, we expose ourselves to a serious amount of danger. And I think at some stage we will recognize that we've just taken on too much. So however ambitious you are, however sure of yourself you are, don't do it. A task that you start on today is likely to end in tears. So before you get going, just ask yourself whether it's really realistic. And this hexagram 28, it moves because this line breaks, and so we then move to the hexagram oppression, which isn't great either. It's exhaustion. So, we might really try to get things done, but remember, preponderance of the great, just taking on too much and completely exhausting ourselves and just accomplishing absolutely nothing. So what I would suggest, given what the I Ching is saying, is that we need to, be reasonable. Don't take on too much. Make sure that whatever we're taking on, it's within our abilities, it's within our strength and our experience, and we've got enough time for it. Because it's just too easy to say, oh yeah, we can do that, and then find that we really, really can't. So these two hexagrams, they're not great, but it's a kind of a warning. Just work out what you can do and what you can't do, and you've got to live today within your limits. That's really important. So let's now go back to the astrology and talk about 9/11. As far as my own memory of 9/11 is concerned, that day I was in England, and I went grocery shopping in Tesco's. If you don't know, Tesco's is a big chain of grocery stores in the UK. And they don't just sell food; they sell electronics and whatever. And I remember the television section of the store. All these televisions, like, I don't know, there seem to be dozens of televisions on, all showing the same picture of the Twin Towers being destroyed. I did actually go up them once. I went to New York in 1979 when I was 16, and I did go up the World Trade Center. It was very impressive, really very impressive indeed. And at least I got to do it. I went up there while it was still standing. Anyway, let's start by looking at the chart for the chart for when the plane went in there. There it is. Here it is, 9/11, September the 11th, 2001 in New York, just after 8:45. I understand that the World Trade Center wasn't the only target. The Pentagon got hit, and people were killed, by planes crashing into the ground. But I believe this was the first sign that something terrible had happened. So when we look at this chart, in itself, in isolation, does it tell us anything? Just on its own, without reference to any other chart. And, I would say possibly not. There's a Jupiter-Pluto opposition. That was one of the outer planet transits going on at the time of 9/11. But in itself, I don't think it says much. Mercury is on the ascendant. So again, you don't really associate Mercury rising with aeroplanes crashing into buildings. Okay, it's true that Saturn is trine Mercury, but again, what's the problem with that? I think this chart on its own makes a little more sense if we put a few more points in. So if we put in, I don't know, if we put in the trans-Neptunians, there's Hades at 21 Gemini, and you can see that if you take the Hades Neptune midpoint, it's on the ascendant. So Hades and Neptune are sort of configured there by Mercury and the ascendant. So you had Mercury on the Neptune Hades midpoint, ascendant on Neptune Hades midpoint. So that suggests Neptune Hades, a sort of a sly attack which causes a lot of death, and the ascendant is the place it happens. So maybe that's telling us something. But again, I think that's very interesting. But we don't want to be in a situation where we have to put up extra points in a desperate attempt to make this chart seem significant. I mean, what I'm really saying is that in order to make sense of the 9/11 chart, we need to compare it with another chart or with other charts. So I'm going to sort of refrain from putting too much emphasis on hypothetical planets. So let's get rid of them, and let's consider the chart of the United States. Now, you would have thought that given this attack, which was certainly one of the most dramatic and moments in American history. I mean, I suppose Pearl Harbor and 9/11 are sort of linked. I don't think there are two events like that in American history which were so sudden. It happened on a particular day and everything changed. Pearl Harbor, 9/11. Okay, you could argue that certainly Pearl Harbor was probably more significant and sort of more humiliating. But 9/11, yes, as it's such a dramatic day in American history, you really would have expected it to have shown up on the United States chart. So let's compare it to the United States chart. So there is the American chart. July the 4th, 1776, 5:10 p.m. There are some question marks about the time that the Declaration of Independence was signed, but this is the chart that is most popular. And so let us compare it with 9/11. So in the middle you have the United States chart. On the outer wheel you have the exact positions of planets at 9 on September the 11th, 2001 at around 8:45 a.m. So the connections are actually quite striking. You will see that at 5:10, the United States has its ascendant at 12:21 Sagittarius at 5:10 p.m. on July the 4th, 1776. Pluto, when transiting Pluto, when the planes hit, was at 12:38 Sagittarius. So Pluto was exactly on the United States' ascendant. I think that is very impressive. Furthermore, I've just said that there was a Saturn-Pluto opposition at the time of a 9/11 attack. So let's have a look at Saturn. So Saturn, if Pluto's on the ascendant, you'd expect Saturn to be on the descendant. And of course, Saturn is. Now, in America's chart, in the United States' chart, it has a Mars-Uranus conjunction on the descendant. So if you look at that Mars-Uranus conjunction, Uranus at 8 Gemini, Mars at 21 Gemini, so the midpoint of that is about 13.6, is about 14.15 Gemini. So this Mars-Uranus on the descendant in the 1776 chart, which I think is that conjunction is so important in terms of how America sees itself, how America acts in the world. It's a conjunction which is about violence. It's about terrorism. It's about America's fear of terrorism and seeing terrorism in different parts of the world, and just being very concerned about it. And as I've said in previous videos, there is a sense in which the United States is projecting that Mars-Uranus. It's not acknowledging the fact that it actually has a terrorist streak itself. When you look at since the Second World War, how many regimes that the United States has been involved in overthrowing, its complicity in sort of violent acts, like, the fall of Allende in Chile in 1973, or the overthrow of Mossadegh in Iran in the early 1950s, what it was doing in Nicaragua, and with the Iran-Contra scandal, and of course more recently the fact that the United States is almost certainly involved in the blowing up of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline during its current war with Russia. So the United States does find it difficult to recognize its kind of inner terrorist, doesn't seem to own the fact that it does have a terroristic streak. But in this case, the United States really was a victim of terrorism. Now, I know there are lots of conspiracy theories about who was responsible for 9/11. While over the last couple of years I found myself more sympathetic to various conspiracy theories, that's not a conspiracy theory that I am personally into and going to push. I take the view that it really was, as we're told, it was Al-Qaeda, and it was them. Now, some of you might think I'm being naive, but I think it was as it was reported. And so that Saturn on the Mars-Uranus midpoint is just completely descriptive. I mean, that is, to my mind, that's perfect. It works very well. So I think we see a perfect example of astrology working with this Pluto opposition Saturn hitting the United States' ascendant. I think the symbolism is great. I know one shouldn't say that. Of course, it would be better if it didn't happen. But if one's an astrologer, one actually wants to see evidence that astrology works. And if you want to see evidence for astrology working, you have to look at big events, not just big events, but huge events. Like 9/11, or an even bigger event like the bombing of Hiroshima. You want to see the planets clearly symbolize what happened, and I think in this case they really do. Also, at the time of 9/11, Mars was at 1 degree 27 minutes Capricorn, and you will notice that the United States is mid-heaven, was at 1-3 Libra. So that was 1-3 Libra was on the mid-heaven when the Declaration of Independence was signed at 5:10 p.m. And Mars was exactly on the mid-heaven, and therefore, Mars was exactly aspecting the ascendant. Mars was exactly aspecting the mid-heaven. It was by square, and it was also obviously, by definition, making a square to the IC. So the connections with the angles, they tell us a lot of important things. They suggest to us that astrology works. They also suggest that the 5:10 p.m. the 5:10 p.m. of the signing of a Declaration of Independence, this really is a good chart. They're also telling us that Pluto works. I sometimes have my doubts about Pluto because it's very small. Indeed, astronomers have sort of downgraded it to a dwarf planet. But no, I think this chart really does show that Pluto is not something that astrologers can ignore, because it's exactly on the ascendant. Then there is America's solar return. Now, we normally think about solar returns as individuals, but countries can have solar returns. So this is when the sun returns to the place it was when you were born, when the sun returns to the place it was when a Declaration of Independence was signed. So there's the USA's chart. So let's find the USA's solar return for 2021. For 2001. Now, at first sight, it doesn't necessarily look too impressive. I mean, we can see Venus rising. Venus rising. That's not so disastrous for a solar return. Could be quite fortunate, actually. Neptune on the midheaven. I suppose that might suggest an act of deception, like this plane hitting the Twin Towers. But, on its own, Venus rising, Neptune on the midheaven is not quite so dramatic. But then we notice that there is a full moon at the time of the solar return. When you've got a full moon on a solar return, if you're looking at an ordinary person's chart, that might indicate that it's a year of a real turning point. It's a year where there's a realization and something has to change. So full moon on the solar return chart for July the 5th, 2001, maybe indicates that something is afoot, that something may be about to happen to the US. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be anything completely disastrous, but it does indicate a change of direction. Then we see Mars and Saturn and Pluto. Now, there is Saturn at 9 Gemini, and there is Pluto at 13 Sagittarius. So there's Saturn-Pluto opposition, but Mars is tied up with it. And so with Mars at 16 Sagittarius, Saturn at 9 Gemini, this means that Pluto is actually on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, exactly on the Mars-Saturn midpoint in this solar return. And that could be a real warning. So when you've got an aspect like that in a solar return, what can happen is it gets baked in for the whole year. So the whole of the next year, for July the 5th, 2001 to July the 4th, 5th, 2002, that Pluto on the Mars-Saturn midpoint is really baked into United States' destiny. So what does that mean, Pluto on the Mars-Saturn midpoint? Well, I am not going to be able to describe that midpoint as well as Reinhold Ebertin in the combination of stellar influences. Again, if you've got any interest in midpoints, you must buy the combination of stellar influences. It is one of the major books of the 20th century. So what does Ebertin say about Pluto on the Mars-Saturn midpoint? He says, brutality, the rage or fury of destruction, the intervening of higher power, bodily injury or harm, parentheses, murder, the death of a great many people. And that's pretty much what happened, isn't it? So Pluto on the Mars-Saturn midpoint baked into the solar return. Okay, it's not exactly on the angles, but it's certainly across the first and the seventh houses. Now, there is also a full moon eclipse at the time of the solar return, so it might be worthwhile looking at the chart for this lunar eclipse on July the 5th. Now, normally when I describe new moons and eclipse, new moons, full moons, I kind of say, well, it's usually lasts 2 to 4 weeks. But when you've got an eclipse, it may last longer. When you've got an eclipse on a solar return, this may last much longer. And, you know, this eclipse is pretty much saying the same thing as the solar return, except when you set this eclipse up to the solar return, Mars is exactly on the IC. You know, the IC is the foundation of society. It's knocking, well, you could see that as knocking buildings down. Okay, I understand the plane didn't go into the foundations, it went to the top, but, you know, things crashing down, that sort of fits Mars on the IC. And Mars is opposition Saturn, and of course Pluto, like in the solar return, because they're so close, is on the Pluto is on the it's on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So I do feel that that solar return for the US was really important, not least because it ties in with the eclipse. Now, at this time, early July 2001, someone was having a birthday. Now, who do you think was having a birthday? Well, yeah, it was him. The president, George Bush Jr., remember him? He's born on July the 6th, 1946. So that's his birthday. So that means that if we look at George Bush Jr.'s solar return for that year, it's pretty much it's not exactly similar, but it's very similar to the United States' solar return, because, you know, it has this same Mars Pluto conjunction, opposition his Saturn in Gemini. And so, like those charts, he also has Pluto on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And of course, unlike the United States, he had an eclipse in his solar return. So, what was going on July the 5th? I say July the 5th, not July the 4th, because the solar return doesn't always happen exactly on the birthday. It can be one day either side, something like that. But yeah, because George Bush Jr. was born on July the 6th, they all came together. The president and the country came together, and they experienced the same thing. And this goes back to this medieval concept that you know the land is the king and the king is the land, and all whatever you think of George Bush Jr., he was the head of he was the head of state at the time. In a way, he was the king. Okay, George Bush Jr. might not have been the most powerful president. I kind of get the impression of George Bush Jr. that there were sort of other people running the show, but unlike Biden, he was cognitively all there at the time. Yeah, I think that's kind of evidence there that the king and the land are together, and George Bush was like the king. And I think the fact that George Bush had his solar return at the same time as the United States had its solar return gave added power to the event. I want to finish by looking at the horoscope of the man who planned it all. Yes, Osama bin Laden. I mean, how can you discuss 9/11 without talking about Osama bin Laden? We don't have his time of birth. So he's set March 10th, 1957. I set this for noon in Riyadh, in Saudi Arabia. So as far as what I want to say about the chart, he's a Pisces. Pisces can be about martyrdom. I mean, that makes sense. We are very much in the age of Pisces still. A lot of people think we're in the age of Aquarius, but we're not. Age of Aquarius doesn't start for a long time. We're in the age of Pisces, and the Christian religions. We have this Christ as a martyr. That's very much connected with the age of Pisces, and of course the fish is the connection with Christianity. And Pisces can have great capacity for sort of compassion, but Pisces can, in certain situations, just lose touch with everything. They can sink into a cause, whatever that cause might be. And once they sink into the cause, all things are possible. The ends always justify the means in terms of that cause. And I think, to an extent, that's what happened with Osama bin Laden. He was a very rich man from a rich family. He gave it all up for the struggle, for the jihad. Firstly, going to Afghanistan to help with the fight against the Soviet Union. Of course, when he went to Afghanistan, he was heavily supported by the United States. So in a sense, Osama bin Laden was created by the United States. Now, Osama bin Laden, he has Mars at 2517 Taurus. Okay, we don't know precisely where his Mars is because we don't know what time his birth was. But his Mars is at 2517 Taurus. What is at 2517 Taurus? What fixed star is at 2517 Taurus? It's of course it's the head of the demon, Ras al Ghul. I don't know any Arabic, but I do know those three words. Ras al Ghul. It's Arabic. It means head of the demon, I believe. So he has Mars on his fixed star, the head of the demon. Incidentally, if you look at Osama bin Laden's solar return for 2021, Saturn was at 2549 Taurus. So Saturn was transiting his Mars on Algol. In other words, the head of the demon, at the time of his solar return on March 10th, 2001, which would have been sort of 6 months before 9/11. So as I said with solar returns, it bakes things in. So that Saturn conjunct his Mars, because it took place at the time of his Saturn return, it baked it in. And so this whole year, I believe, because of this solar return, was about Saturn's activation of his natal Mars on Algol. So what does it mean to have Mars on Algol? So looking at Vivian Robson, he wrote this book a long time ago called The Fixed Stars and Constellations in Astrology. So if we read about Algol on Mars, so okay, so just some note. He gives some notes, by the way, about Algol. He says a white binary and variable star marking the Medusa's head, held in the hand of Perseus. Its diameter is 1,060,000 miles. I don't know if that's true or not, and its density only a little above that of Cork. Algol is from Ras Al Ghul, the demon's head. Other names in frequent use being Caput Algol and Caput Medusae. It was known as Lilith by the Hebrews after the nocturnal vampire said to be Adam's first wife, and Zay Shay, piled up corpses, by the Chinese. And then he tells us what it means if you've got Mars conjunct Algol. And he says, with Mars, which is of course what Osama bin Laden had, with Mars, or if Mars be elevated above the luminaries when Algol is angular, the native will be a murderer who will come to an untimely end. And you can't say it truer than that, can you? That's pretty much it for Osama bin Laden. Anyway, I'm sorry 9/11 happened. I'm sorry I have to have this video about 9/11, but you know, astrologers are ghouls. Remember, that's an Arabic. The word ghoul has an Arabic origin. Ras al Ghul, head of the demon. And astrologers can be ghouls. You know, we get obsessed about the horoscopes of deaths, disasters, and whatever. And you know, it's not just me. You know, from the very beginning, when I started learning astrology, if there was a disaster in the astrology class, you know, some big event, everyone would want to look at this, you know, look at the astrology for it. You know, it's just what astrologers do. It's the nature of being an astrologer. I'm afraid, at least the nature of being an astrologer when I was studying astrology. Maybe modern astrologers, a new generation of astrologers don't like to get involved with this kind of stuff. I don't know. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about the subject of 9/11. And thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.